I've just pasted some responses I got from that original post I did on principles. And so this person responded about what is it about human nature that gives rise to principles. And so animals, I'll just try and, okay, so what he's done, I'll just break it down to make it easy so it's not a big block. But what he's done is he's basically explained we function by means of concepts. And so in order for us to identify what is good and bad and take that into account and deal with that complexity, we need reason, and reason means principles. Basically, that's this whole part, right?
I need to get a closer look.
Oh, okay. Yeah. And what it means for a principle to work, it means this.
It's more than just working in the abstract sense, that it works as in it really does accomplish a particular goal in reality. I mean, I should just clarify that they work to accomplish something.
Right.
They work to guide your thinking, not just the abstract sense of being true, but working in resulting in a meaningful change or meaningful consequence to your life.
Right. In practice,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm always wary of saying that animals survive because they're programmed to in some automatic way, but I still distinguish in terms of they aren't thinking abstractly. They're concrete bound. They can't think beyond the moment.
Right.
And that's fair enough for that.
Yep.
And that doesn't require principles, nor could they if they wanted to. It just says no function because they don't have the right type of body to do so.
Yep. Okay, so that was the first part.
Yeah.
And then, so now this is where I guess I have questions.
Yeah.
I'm gonna reply to this, but I wanted to discuss it with you first as well. So, okay, so the alternative is going by chance, which he calls pragmatism, and he says it's rolling the dice.
Who gave this response? Who was this?
A guy called Jim.
Oh, okay.
It's from HBL. It's from HBL.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I've just removed all the identifying details from these. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so then his only alternative is to act on feelings, which means randomly, rolling the dice. Okay.
Essentially, yes.
So it's Russian roulette. He might get lucky, he might not. Okay, and then principles are the antidote to that. Let me see, I'll find what else is relevant here that I wanted to discuss. Okay, so he's saying it may take a day, a year, or many years, but no life can survive for long if it is not goal-directed, but at the mercy of random forces of nature. This is the penalty for violating principles. The principles are not like religious principles where God metes out an immediate reward and punishment for abiding or failing to abide by religious dogma. It doesn't care one bit. So this is, the penalty is not instant death, but leaving oneself to the mercy of an unyielding reality. And then he gives the analogy of running blindfolded into traffic. Okay.
Yeah.
And then, so basically you're leaving it to chance. And so there's a couple of things I was thinking about. So one is this idea of chance. Is that similar again to logic, where you can say something logical, but if you don't have the method of logic, you're like the fact that you reaching contradiction at some point is guaranteed. So sometimes you can take an action and in a sense it's principled, although you're not principled. It's just by chance you've taken an action that's principled. Similar to how you can say, people were making arguments for a long time, right? Before they had the science of logic. And sometimes they were logical and sometimes they weren't. And so do you think that there's a similarity or an analogy here between that and logic?
Yeah, there's a relation. That's kind of what I mean by something being indeterminate. If you don't use principles, that there's no way to really know that anything you get right is incidental. It's just by chance. It's not it wasn't something that you brought about by your will or your actions. And that's really the main thing going on. I mean, we could argue whether it's truly by chance, but it's nothing that we're controlling or determining, or that's not based on some thinking into the future, that is only thinking about the right now at best, that you wouldn't be able to think any better than an animal. And since by nature as a human, if other requirements of living, namely using your reason, producing all of your values, even interaction among people, that you're even abandoning something worse is worse than just acting like an animal. You're abandoning the very thing that enables you uniquely as a human to exist.
Right.
So that's even worse, that not only you're abandoning the way to figure out what's right, but even our means of doing things that are correct. Because then there's no way to systematically do the right thing or to happen upon the results that we want.
Am I right in saying another analogy is what we discussed yesterday, which is the fact that when you don't have a standard, I still haven't thought through what
Right.
you explained to me, but I need to think this through in more detail. But the point is, when you don't have a standard, like you're not, just like you can't evaluate an object outside of a principle or outside of a standard, I think, as you put it, right?
Right.
You can evaluate the method. So for example, I think we gave the example in terms of stealing bread.
Yeah.
And so you can't evaluate, or breakfast, it was breakfast. You can't evaluate, like, okay, I stole this breakfast. Is the breakfast good or bad? But you can evaluate, I stole it. And
Probably.
is it, probably.
It's hard to say. That would be like more analyzing the method is slightly different than analyzing the value. I mean, you could look at the method, but if the thing we're evaluating is outside any standard, we can no longer use that standard to judge it. Maybe you could judge whether, say, it's healthy or something, but you couldn't really judge per se, is it ethical once you've abandoned standards of ethics, for example?
But
Because you have to
yeah, go on.
you have to use the standards to
Right.
evaluate anything. Otherwise, you're not evaluating it. It's arbitrary, or it's by chance or by whim, or whatever's
Right.
basis except reason.
So my understanding was that, with the bread, yeah, obviously if I'm evaluating its health in general for all people, I can make a statement on the bread. But then in terms of like evaluating this bread's relationship to another, I think I need to think this one over, because I can
In
see
relationship to
to
the
other
field of thought,
values.
or in relation, in a sense that like in relation to ethics, it's like in relation to life as a standard value,
Right.
or it could be like in relation to economics, say, if that's what you were trying to think about, like what is the nature of trade, or what is the nature of exchanging services.
Right.
Or we could talk about the nature of, I don't know, of psychology, and we have different standards there of evaluating why did you do it that way, or what compelled you to do that, which is a different than question than is it right or wrong that you did that.
Yes.
These are different questions.
But I still can't, in the case of the bread example, I still can't go, I can't say this bread is, well, okay, I understood it as I can't evaluate the bread as a value in the person's life. I can just simply say stealing the bread is bad. That's how I understood, but maybe I do need to think that over. I thought there was an analogy between that and what I'm reading here, which is, if I'm trying to concretize the consequence of someone stealing something or doing something bad, that might not be the way to do it, because
Okay.
Yeah, you know what I'm
maybe
saying?
I see an issue. Are you thinking in terms of your perspective on the outside?
Yeah.
Is that what you're thinking about?
Yeah.
As opposed to the person doing it?
Well, both. I think both. I was trying to draw the analogy
Okay.
between the fact that you can't evaluate, according to Peikoff, you can't evaluate once something is outside of a standard or a ethics, you can't evaluate the value of the thing. And so
I
I
would
thought
say
maybe
that
there's an analogy.
I get what you're saying. I think you're thinking it in terms of Peikoff's saying it in terms of the person taking the action. I don't think he's talking about you as a third person. I think you as a third person can judge it, but as the individual doing it, since you've abandoned a standard by which to judge, you yourself as the one taking the action have no basis with which to, for yourself to determine what is right or wrong, or what is the correct course of action.
Oh, okay. All right. So
You as
maybe
the
it's something
thinker,
else.
versus if you're judging it from the outside, we can judge it as if a person who doesn't follow these standards couldn't be attaining what is good or they're flourishing. And you are still judging by means of a standard from the
Right.
outside. Because
Right.
you've not abandoned the standard. The person doing it
Okay.
has.
Okay.
And you could judge it in terms of that way. On the outside, you can evaluate it. But if you're the one who's abandoned the standards, you can't evaluate it anymore. There's
Got
no
it.
means you could do it.
I need to go review that
Okay.
and think it over because
Yeah.
then I've misunderstood what I posted. I misunderstood.
Okay.
Okay, so maybe there's no analogy between that and what I'm reading here. So, okay, do you think that when he says essentially if you don't follow principle, it's chance? Is it the case that in that case, the times this person who is unprincipled has success is when he is by chance principled? Or is he saying that, just like maybe this analogy this is where it breaks down, but like if you run through traffic, sometimes you make it through, right? And so is he saying
Yeah.
sometimes you can be unprincipled, like you can steal or do some other unprincipled thing and get away with it? Like, and you do actually get away with it in the sense that you get a reward.
Yeah, you could get away with it in that sense, yes. By chance,
Okay.
it's not. You can't control it. It's not by any standard or basis that this is occurring, except incidentally or by luck in a way.
Okay. But this is where I'm confused then, because I thought that, at least my understanding of the principle was that it identifies some very important causal factor involved in everything, and it
Yes.
abstracts away everything else except for that. And so it always works. Like it always works. It doesn't mean that I'm going to well, actually, yeah, I'm not, that's what I'm confused about. Like it always works, but then when doesn't it work? That's, and in the case of violating principles, how is it that you can have, if they sometimes do work, if people sometimes get away with it, how does one think about, okay, well, how does one think about like what causes someone to get away? We're just saying, we can't just say it's chance, because in that case, we just haven't identified the causal factor. To say something is random or chance means we haven't identified a causal factor. But that's what I'm trying to get my head around, because are we saying that they always work? Because it seems like in some places we say they always work, and then at the same time, people can get away with, at least from what he's saying here, one interpretation is people can get away with being unprincipled, at least for a while, they say. But to say it's just all chance to me just means then we haven't identified what lets them get away with it.
Yeah, that's kind of what I meant, I think. But I don't like the word chance there entirely, because there is an element that, well, I can distinguish it this way. We can think of the actions you as an individual take, whether you can attain the results that you want. I mean, that's one way of getting things deliberately or not by chance. Like if you mean to get an A in a class,
Yes.
you get an A in the class. And that's not by chance, obviously, because you want it to occur and you brought it to fruition.
Mm-hmm.
You did all the requirements of that. knowingly and deliberately. So it wasn't by chance.
Yep.
But say you wanted to meet your friend at the mall, but hoping to meet them, but you weren't doing it. You didn't call them. You didn't talk to them. You're just going to the mall. It's like, oh, I wonder if I'll see Jeremy today or something. And then you
Okay.
see them. It's not like you magically made them appear or that you're telepathic. It's just he happened to be there, but you didn't intend
Right.
to make him go there. He just
Yes.
was. So there's two senses of on purpose or versus by chance there, but it isn't just by chance, literally. He showed up there like at a reason to go, at a basis to go. Maybe there's even a reason to explain why you ran into each other. It's not like you deliberately did it.
Yeah.
So I'm talking about more like the consequences. Are the consequences intended or are the consequences just the result of incidentally ending up that way?
Okay.
Which I guess I suppose you could get things to turn out the way you want. But if it's by chance, in the sense that it's only incidental, then it's hard to repeat it or make sure it results in the way you want
Yeah.
in the long term.
Right.
All things like that.
Right. Okay. And then what are your thoughts on when we say, when he's saying that, yeah, sometimes you can, what is it? Sometimes you can get away, you might get lucky. I think that's the expression.
Yes.
You might, like, so
Yes.
that means a criminal can get lucky. Like, but then in that case, if we're saying nothing is actually, there's no such thing, in a sense, there's no such thing as luck or randomness. There's always some cause. So then wouldn't one ask, what is the cause of his luckiness? If he is lucky, it isn't random. There's no such thing as random. Everything has a cause. There's cause and effect. So then if you look at a criminal and you can't just say, what does it mean to say he gets lucky? Because then I would question, given my understanding of principles in my own context, I'm like, well, okay, isn't that a concern to think about? Like, if we're just saying, oh, like, oh, some people just get lucky, like, follow the principles, they're good for you, but sometimes people get lucky and in the end things don't work out, but there are periods where they can get lucky and have great success. Like, that doesn't seem very convincing to me, at least based on my understanding.
Well, I was thinking of it like, say, there's a turtle crossing the road.
Okay.
It just crosses and no cars hit it. Is it because the turtle planned that?
No.
Or in today's, it's more like he got lucky in the
Yeah.
sense that he couldn't plan it, but the way that things met up was like they just happened to not cause a problem in a way that, yes, he didn't identify what enabled him to do that, which is
Right.
avoiding the cars or timing it so he doesn't get hit by the cars. And in that sense, he didn't discover it, so he can never repeat it. And he can't really know, to live by your nature. You don't want to do things like you want to do things to attain them for a reason or on purpose or to deliberately attain them, not just
Right.
incidentally flourish.
Maybe we're saying then that, see, this is the problem here, is I'm still too abstract on this. Like, I don't have specifics, but maybe what we're saying then is that there are things you just can't know. Like, for example, if I violate a moral principle, let's say, it's saying that, yeah, there are causal factors involved, but you can't have knowledge of them, meaning, like, I don't know what someone else is going to do or not do if I violate a principle, but I do know that, does that make sense? I don't know if they're going to attack or they're going to, you can't know. And so that's what philosophy is saying, like, because you can't know what their reaction is, it's in that sense, it's just like a turtle, right? A turtle in its nature can't predict where all the cars will be, right?
He can't.
And a human, and similarly, a human violating a principle might not be able to predict. We're saying that, okay, there are situations where, for example, if you rob someone or something like that, you can't say with certainty in the abstract, like this or that. And so in that sense, it's like, yeah, someone might not do anything or anything, like someone might not retaliate and you might get away with it, but you don't know, essentially. Is that what we're saying there? So you
Yeah,
can
there's
get
no
lucky,
way.
but you don't know.
Yeah, the not knowing is really the main thing, that there's no way to know. Almost
Okay.
like you're saying that you won't be able to, you won't be able to figure it out. You won't be able to find the underlying thing that led to why things resulted this way.
I
Like, you
get it.
could figure it out, but without that, without the knowledge, you'll never get there.
Okay. But then I do wonder if you can have, I'll show you in a minute, like a specific concretization of like someone I feel, or an example of someone who did a lot of bad things and then to me seemed
Yeah.
to have like everything turned out great. So it makes it difficult when you put it in that, like when you have that in your context as well.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, I think I'm closer. So basically,
Yeah.
yeah, things we can't predict. Philosophy deals with things we can. Okay.
Yeah.
And then this was someone else following up, and basically the thing I wanted to ask you about were the center of page examples, the kind of examples Peacock uses in OPA. You know, like someone starting a gold mine, a stock company, a gold mine company, and then raising all these funds and running away, I think was one of them.
Yeah.
And we use those principles to understand how to conduct. So you develop the principles from what he calls center of page examples. And so my question is about a center of page example. Like how else would you describe it other than like obviously bad consequences? What else is a characteristic of a center of page example and like finding them?
Um, the more, well, the things you base your thinking on to start with, I think it's usually how I think of it. Like, if we want to talk about, I think an example, an easy one. If we want to talk about, what's a good example?
Does that mean something like, let's say I want to concretize lying. I would concretize if I lied about everything, like every time I said something different or what? Yeah, I'm just trying to get at like what I'm trying to work this out so I can then do these examples.
Well, you begin with example that is clear cut, that your most immediate examples of this concept. See, it was individual rights to maybe your first example deals with, I don't know, stealing a car rather than a fringe case like pirating. If you want to think about first to understand how to deal with theft, then
Okay.
start with the more clear cut things
Okay.
to begin with.
Right.
And that's
But
just like,
yeah, go on.
just
Sorry.
start. I think that's the center of the page because it's very clear and basic, but only at that point can you go on to more complex things. We notice the exceptions, the differences, or the distinctions we could make even further about theft. In a way, it's just like a first principle, first idea that I'll say first idea that stealing cars is theft and it's bad because it violates individual rights. And that's the principle you're violating. But if you want to think deeper about it, we gotta expand on that example. We to go to a more fringe case. We might then go to, like, you're asking about what do I do with, you've been asking me what about pirating?
Yeah.
Well, that's a not so clear cut. And you can start by understanding what's related to or similar to when I steal a car. What are the similarities? And you can think, what are the differences? Well, it's more abstract. It deals with maybe a further principle or a further idea than just the clear cut case of stealing a car. Um,
Okay. So I guess I should do that as an exercise. Actually, I should just write pages and pages of concretized things of me trying to project out what can happen in different situations. But my question then would be, okay, it seems like we're saying a center of page example is one where the consequences are obvious. But then I would say, well, then, basically what you're doing is you're looking for situations where it's very difficult to get away with it. But what if you focused on, but that, maybe there are examples where it's easier to get away with it. And so they contradict the fact that principles work all the time. I know that probably, to me, like genuinely in my head, that's how it seems to it kind of collapses, because if those other little things work, then how does it, I need to get my head around that, because I don't get that fully. I'm gonna have to write about that too.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah, that's a good idea, because you want to avoid the bias that you're deciding to begin with that the right answer must be
Right.
honesty. I mean, that's a good way to don't be biased. Just make sure that you're thinking of actual distinctions, not just the ones that bias you to the conclusion that you already want.
Is it fair to me to say, okay, the center of page, I don't know what that is. I'm going to ask him for a definition. But then let's say there's corner of page. I'm just making that up. There are plenty. I could come up with plenty of corner page examples, probably even more than center of page examples, like all the ones I posted, right? And so in the case of center of page, aren't we trying to say, like, here's what happens pretty much most of the time or all the time? But actually, in my mind, it seems like all the corner of page stuff is what happens more of the time. The stuff that people, you can't see any consequences.
The method here, I think, is about making sure that your examples deal with similar enough concretes that we can make comparisons.
Okay.
I mean, that's really the main idea, I think. Like, even just making comparisons is what we want to do. Like, how do we distinguish, well, what's different about taking a car versus taking a course that you didn't pay for? Even just get rid of the moral words to start with. Just distinguish these sort of examples without the words at first. Just like, oh, there's taking cars versus taking software.
Yeah.
You just talk about the differences. One's abstract. One exists on a computer. One just exists as bytes. One involves intellectual production, or just questions like that, which aren't necessarily morally loaded terms.
Right.
And then we could start categorizing them with different words, like whatever reasons you might have, or whatever words you might like to distinguish these things. So I always find it most useful to always begin just by making distinctions, even if they're very basic.
Right.
Like, what's the difference between an online course versus a car? Well, it's probably really easy and quick to do.
Yes.
Like, what are the differences? If we want to think about principles in these different contexts, well, we need to deal with the differences. The new context makes a new choice, or the new context on the what?
I was just going to say one is replica, but I don't know how to say it. Or you can replicate one very easily without barely any resources.
Yeah.
But yeah, sorry, I cut you off.
And that could help you concretize a principle later on once you worked out these distinctions. You could compare it to, like, is it honesty, or is it more honest to, or even forget that, you could say, how does one bring me to flourishing? Would one way bring me closer to flourishing?
Right.
Is there a way that it wouldn't bring me to flourish? And make those distinctions and reason from there. That's about concretizing these principles, and whether they're valid or not, or bringing it closer to reality by making comparisons with actual things that happen.
Okay. I'm going to spend some more time writing and replying to that stuff. But here's a quote from, this is the bank robber who turned into it, who escaped to India. And he writes, and this is like the introduction to his book. And to me, it's written beautifully. And it sounds like, if you want to read it, and then we can discuss.
Yeah.
So, here is someone who, let's say, made a lot of mistakes. And yet it's hard for me to project, if I want to combine this with what I've learned about principles. He's someone, let's say, who's violated a lot of moral principles early on. We can say that, and even consistently for a long period. And yet it's hard to project. I don't know how much of this is just my own subjective preferences, but it's really hard for me to project an alternative where his life doesn't seem so interesting and adventurous. And now in the position that he's in, where he's, let's say, made amends later, where it's so, he's got this a kind of character that what I concretize when I try and project an alternative is someone who is relatively uninteresting. And but I know, see, those aren't moral terms when I say uninteresting, but it's just hard. It's so hard to project an alternative. This seems like it. Yeah. Okay. All the things he experienced, some of them were terrible when they were happening, and let's say he almost lost his life. But when you look at it in retrospect from the vantage point of where he's currently at, it's hard. It makes it difficult because I think, okay, look at all these things he just gained by chance, and the character he has, and the stories he's able to write. And would he have gotten that if he followed moral principle like that? That it's so hard to project. That's my difficulty, basically. And there are tons of examples like this. This is a one isolated one, but
I think that's a common question throughout literature, even probably in the Odyssey. Even makes me think of Achilles. Like he looks really cool and flashy and like the coolest Greek warrior, but he's a really bad temper. He gets really mad at people. He's very impulsive, and he died young anyway, just because he's acts out emotionally.
Right.
As cool as he was, it's like he didn't really flourish. He for a time was like the most courageous Greek ever, but he acts like on impulse, almost like an animal sometimes.
Right.
He acts on just this rashness, and that's in a way he lives on borrowed time. Like there's no reason, rhyme or reason why he's living. Like he doesn't know whether he'll die tomorrow. Like he lives like a star that's burning out tomorrow. And it's no way you can predict because he's not using moral principles to decide anything. It's just
whatever he feels like.
Yeah. He might live the next day. He might die. But to him, that's courage in a way. You live, you ignore the fear and just keep going. That's my understanding of Achilles.
Right. Because that's interesting. What you described as makes me think of Jack, Jack London?
Yes.
This is a quote from him, and his characters are very similar, some of them.
Yeah.
And it's this, right? It speaks to what you're saying about Achilles. So, and then I guess the question is, what is the appeal of that? Like, is that, because it does seem appealing for whatever reason, I have no idea, but it just seems appealing. And so then reconciling that with principles, which I don't know, they just don't seem as, it's hard to project a life that's as exciting, and also not just exciting in the moment, but like worth living and alive. It's just very difficult to project something as appealing with principles. Anyway, I guess I have to think about that more. So
Well, that's why I had Odysseus, because although at first he might seem more stilted and more like principle driven and rational, but he had a whole adventure to get home, a whole book about his adventures. So he didn't really lead
Odysseus,
a boring life. Yeah,
right?
he had to solve and think and figure out to make it home in the long term. That he's really after that flourishing life, the real Greek way of thinking about life, not just Achilles is out there to burn out the stars or something.
Yeah. Fair enough. And what about Nietzsche? Isn't Nietzsche a bit like that too?
A little bit, but he's
The
very much
man
a
crossing the
scholar.
tightrope. Okay.
Yeah, but he's very much a scholar, and that's probably why I made that worm joke. Like he's both making fun of himself, but then also capturing that he loves everything. He loves the world. Like he wants to see it. He wants to know it, as absurd and ridiculous as it might look.
Okay.
But he's like a mix, I guess. He shows a lot of passion, but he was also still very, well, he was about like combining the two. Like
Yep.
he wants that passion. That's the Dionysian way of life. That's the Dionysian attitude, is basically Achilles, like passionate and impulsive and about like drinking and happiness and those more hedonistic things. And Odysseus is more the Apollo, where you construct the world rationally, you understand it rationally, use principles to figure out what's right, and you construct something artificially. That's how Nietzsche saw it. And he thought that like the best thing would be to be both.
Yes. I wonder if this is a problem of art, meaning it just so happens that because we've had, like I think traditionally, like for example, sex was bad immorality, or certain things like
Yes.
charging interest, or
Yeah.
I don't know, there's probably other things that in a different morality might be good. And so when you have all those things, and it's a kind of mixed, it's mixed in the sense that some things are good, like maybe rational thought might be good, but then they'll say that, charging interest or sleeping with a lot of people. I don't know what else was in the church that in objectivist morality is considered good, but in church is considered bad. But there's probably more
Yes.
things that can come to
Yeah.
mind. But then if that's the case, then in literature, all the exciting characters are going to be necessarily mixed and have those impulsive elements that are bad, but then other things that would be considered good morally. And so it's an issue of projecting, and the art's not there. So for someone like who doesn't have that much of a creative imagination, it's very hard to concretize that it would
Yes.
be exciting or alive. Maybe that's what the problem is.
Could be. That seems a good possibility. A lot of these questions, I like your question about like, well, what does it mean if you could just get lucky? I'm not. That is a huge question. I think you're not going to get an easy answer to that. And usually art is where to look, because it is such a complex question, and it has been asked many times
Really?
ever since Plato. They probably asked in some form or another,
What
what
are
if you just get lucky?
what
Or
are
what if you
examples?
just, well,
Sorry, I keep cutting you off because I'm excited, but
probably the ring of Gyges is, if you were invisible, you can get away with anything. Should you still do these things? That was in the Republic. That
right.
was similar to this. It's not the same, but Aristotle talked about this somewhat. Yeah, he talks about luck.
Don't, but
Um,
aren't these essential questions? Because it seems to me it's very hard to convince myself, like that. It's what makes something when if you see something like this quote from Jack London, or this quote from this person who robbed banks and went to India, like sometimes seeing these examples concretized and in real people motivates you in a way that just
yes,
reading an abstraction can't. And it's so hard to then,
right.
like, if it's impossible. Why would you, even if you, in theory, I don't want to say in theory, but in the abstract, if you're like, okay, this makes sense, but it's just not convincing, you're going to be less likely to follow it at times that matter, or even in
Yes,
small ways. because you just can't see it. So it seems like it's a very important question.
Yes, I think it's important. It's just that it captures so much about life, I think,
Right.
that when we're asking about luck, we're not just asking about like, oh, I got lucky with the lottery, or I
Right.
got lucky and crossed the road without getting killed. I mean, that's a very narrow sense of luck that we probably don't care that much about. And principles don't really apply to that anyways. Doesn't apply to winning or losing the lottery, really. I mean, that's just a thing that happens incidentally. It's not something you really control. But if you think about luck and like, can you luckily get happy and live a happy life? Well, that's asking a really fundamental question. Well, what is happiness? How do you get it? How do you maintain it? And even if you do maintain it, do you really need to think about it? Can you just get lucky and maintain it? I mean, you're just asking such a wide question that I think you need an entire book, which is why we have like Nicomachean ethics. And Aristotle wrote a book about all of ethics because you can't treat it in just a few principles. It's an entire field of thought, I would say. And luck is a big aspect, I think, to consider. Even though I don't think it's relevant to moral action, I think it's a conceptual question that's pretty worth asking. And a lot of time you need art to concretize the degree that's so abstract.
Right.
There's so many concretes. It's almost like an expansion on that middle of the page. Like if we could just look at concretes and get it, that would be great. But we can't. We need something wider and more abstract, which could be art, could be concepts or principles. I think in cases like this, art helps you capture even more, or it's a better start than strictly what are the examples of luck and honesty or things like that. Gives you something to work with.
Yeah. Although in these cases, like Jack London and I think his name was Gregory David Roberts, it makes it more difficult. Like it's almost more evidence of like, oh, here are people who do tons of bad things and look at how great their lives were. As in aspects of them were terrible, but on the whole, if I compare it to even Howard Rourke, like Howard Rourke's good because he's an example of concretizing someone very principled and it works well. But there's still a certain appeal, at least for me. So this is where it could be subjective, where these like Achilles or Jack London's characters have that, maybe Howard Rourke wouldn't have. And I don't know, they make it makes it more difficult actually when you keep these characters in mind.
Yeah. Just as a matter of like personal introspection, like sometimes it makes me like I relate to what you're saying. In some way, it makes me think of like maybe that is sometimes why Nietzsche has some appeal to me, because somewhere within me I still see like a doubt maybe that you could always predict it, or there's some doubt that but that's one of the things like one of those things in life you deal with, like could be good or it could be bad. And I think everybody probably has some question that hits them a lot and they wonder about it. But I think there's always so much of a question that we're always looking for new ways to answer it. And for me, in a way, sometimes I feel like I'm always looking for new ways to answer what should I do, just for myself even. And I ask that a lot. And maybe that's why I've always gotten to objectivism at first, because I always want that question, the answer to that question. And objectivism has given me the best answers and the most productive ways to think about it.
Right.
But it hasn't given me every way to think about it. Sometimes you get new ways from other thinkers. So maybe sometimes it's into question. Or maybe there's some things I'll just say Rand is wrong about. Or I mean, I've read a lot of different philosophers, so I mean, I'll come with different conclusions.
Yeah. I'm interested in exploring other thinkers too. I think to me, what you're saying though, just means it's worth digging deeper into this question and just, what is it like? Throwing things around, trying to get as much attention as possible, getting smart people to help me answer this, or give me
Yes.
see what they, even just to see what they think. How are they thinking about this, if at all? Because it just seems too important to not think about it. But anyway, okay, well, I'm going to keep writing about that and posting and so on. So I'm sure we'll come back to it. And I remember you mentioning the Ring of Gaitis Fra. What I've experienced so far is I find it, I mean, this is a perfect example, right? I can read one text in philosophy. In the example, in this case, I'm reading objectivism. And it's taken me a really long time to get my head around some of this stuff. And so then to move on to Nietzsche and Aristotle is like, I can do it, but it's clearly like I'm only getting 40, let's say, I'm getting more than 40%. It's not accurate. In a big picture, I can see roughly what this is about, but to then flesh it out and to feel that it's true is a different thing.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to leave this here. Next random question. What generalizations am I integrating to utter existence exists? Is it a generalization that I'm integrating, or is it simply like my immediate perceptual field?
In this case, I would say generalization is an abstractive and an abstraction. That's what I would say.
What are the generalizations that I'm integrating though? What kind of more accurate question would be, what kind of generalizations would I be, or could I be integrating to get to that, or is it just what I see in front of me and then I get to existence exists?
I mean, you just keep integrating everything. Well, it's the widest abstraction. At the same time, it also includes every concrete. So it gets weird that way. But I would say it's mostly a matter of further integrating everything to find the one thing in common among everything, which is existence. That's the one thing in common among things that exist. And it's,
okay,
in that sense, it's integrating everything across the field,
but
like everything, even beyond your perception, as in even your cognition and what you imagine, and things that are consequences of actions or like attributes of entities. It's everything.
But can I get to
everything.
Can I get to it by integrating just concepts, or do I need generalizations? Because concepts would be like, okay, chair, cup, or maybe leaf, tree, rock, tiger, and then I get to existence exists. Or do I have to get to the point where I'm turning propositions into generalizations?
Wouldn't you say that concepts are generalizations?
I don't know. That's still a question for me. I remember I asked you a while ago. Yeah,
I would still say it is. I mean, they are generalizations, and propositions are too. I think it's just integrating everything. Just, I know how broad that sounds, but it's just integrating upon it. Integrating. Okay. Eventually you see a commonality, like to very general things.
Okay.
Like if you start generalizing from dog, apple, cat, car, color, you might eventually get to like thing, and thing might go to idea, or they go have idea, thing, and shape maybe. And you just keep going more general, like what's in common among a shape and an idea? Well, that they exist. And I mean, there's just things like that you keep getting more abstract,
right,
until you get something like you're just including everything.
Right. Okay. All right. Let's see if we fit in something short. Okay, I don't know, this might not be short enough, but we'll see what it's about. I'll have to read the quote with you because I haven't opened this in a while.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess that's my question, is like, how do I validate this? Because it's actually the same. It's the same as Socrates' point, right? The only addition is that there's a there's an ability for someone to be willfully make themselves blind, as opposed to a deterministic thing where blind therefore blind leads to doing bad thing. It's more someone can choose to be blind. But how do I know that? Like, how do I validate that it's always, even Socrates would have had to come up with this, right? I don't know how he did, but how do you validate that? Okay, in every time someone does something seemingly cruel or evil, it's because they're ignorant, and whether that's self-made or not self or by error. Like, how do you validate that? Because there are characters convincingly concretized who are evil and conscious of evil. Like even Tui is an example of that.
Yeah. Is that any different than any other conclusion involving certainty? How do you attain certainty? It's the same sort of question.
What's the standard of proof then?
Well, just examples. I mean, I'm not quite sure I know what you mean.
Yeah, okay.
Are you just trying to validate? And are you just validating whether or not you choose to make yourself blind? Whether evasion is a choice? Is that your question?
No, actually, my question is why is evil only a result of blindness, whether self-made or by error? Why can't evil be a result of conscious choice, just like Tui consciously talking about all the evil things he's doing?
Okay, I see.
You know, how did Socrates or how did Rand get to this point is what I was trying to figure out. Because it's an interesting point, and it would actually, I could see it being true. I just don't know how to like validate that it's true, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Because I can conceive of, at least in my mind, I can picture or project someone who is consciously evil, not through blindness or evasion.
I don't really know.
Yeah, okay.
I don't have a good answer. I haven't thought about that one.